September 19th, 1944. The morning fog hung thick over the rolling hills of Lorraine, France. Dew glistened on crushed wheat. Somewhere in that pale gray silence, a low mechanical hum began to rise. Deep, steady, relentless, the sound of American engines warming in the cold. To the east, German officers scanned the ridgeline through binoculars. The hill was steep, muddy, and cut with deep tracks from retreating infantry. No tank, they believed, could climb it, especially not a Sherman, the Tommy Cooker, as they called it mockingly. But the sound grew louder. One after another, silhouettes emerged through the mist, olive-drab shapes grinding upward, treads clawing into the earth. The German officers froze. The impossible was happening before their eyes. Shermans were climbing. Within minutes, cannon fire cracked through the fog, echoing across the valley. Smoke drifted from shattered Panthers that had been perfectly positioned just moments earlier, and in that moment, as the thunder of engines drowned the silence of disbelief, the myth of German armored invincibility began to tremble. Because this morning was no accident. It was the result of months of evolution, in machines, in minds, and in morale. By September 1944, the war in Western Europe had reached a strange, uneasy rhythm. After the breakout from Normandy and the liberation of Paris, American columns were pushing fast across France, sometimes too fast. Fuel convoys lagged behind, ammunition stockpiles thinned, and worn-out tanks rumbled forward on borrowed parts. Yet morale was high. The soldiers believed the war might end by Christmas. Across the lines, German command was desperate to prove that belief wrong. The 5th Panzer Army, newly re-equipped with Panther tanks, was ordered to halt General Patton's Third Army in eastern France. These Panthers were considered the pride of German engineering, sleek, thick-armored, and deadly at long range. Many of their crews had been told the same thing. One Panther can destroy 5 Shermans. For the Americans of the 4th Armored Division, that arithmetic was more than just a rumor. It was a weight they carried into every engagement. The Sherman's armor was thinner, its guns smaller, its profile taller. What the Americans possessed instead was something less visible, but far more decisive: communication, coordination, and a doctrine of speed. Lorraine's terrain offered both sides a paradox: wide plains cut by sudden ridges and patches of heavy fog. To the German eye, these hills were natural fortresses, perfect ground for their heavier tanks to dominate from above. To the Americans, they were obstacles to be conquered through movement, not standoff. The U.S. radio network linked tank platoons, artillery, and air reconnaissance into a single fluid organism. And so, while German officers studied maps and calculated angles of fire, American crews listened for one sound: the steady rumble of their engines, the heartbeat of an army built on motion. That sound would soon echo through the valleys of Aracourt, where 2 armored doctrines, precision and production, were about to collide. The small French village of Aracourt lay quiet beneath a veil of morning fog, the kind that dulled the edges of sound and turned every outline into a ghost. To the south, General John S. Wood's U.S. 4th Armored Division waited in defensive positions spread across the rolling countryside. Their Sherman tanks, many from the 37th Tank Battalion, were dug into the misty ridges and narrow roads near Hill 318 and Hill 240, strategic high ground overlooking the German approach routes. The Germans, unaware of the exact American dispositions, were confident. They had massed nearly 90 Panthers and marked the force under the newly formed 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades. These units were filled with fresh recruits, but equipped with some of the best armor Germany could field. Their orders were simple: punch through the American screen, retake Lunéville, and cut Patton's supply lines. Once more, the Reich would show that its armor ruled Europe's fields. But beneath the fog, the Shermans were waiting. Unlike the Panthers, American tank crews carried radios in every vehicle, a small advantage that multiplied in chaos. The terrain favored those who could move and communicate. German tanks, designed for open fields, struggled to coordinate in low visibility and soft ground. Panthers bogged down, their long guns unable to depress fully on slopes. In contrast, Shermans, lighter and more agile, maneuvered like hunters in the mist. As dawn broke on September 19th, the first German columns advanced across the fields below Aricourt. From the ridge, American spotters could hear the deep growl of Maybach engines, the symphony of German armor approaching through the fog. Orders crackled across American radios. Crews loaded high-velocity shells. And when the first silhouettes appeared through the haze, the Shermans fired. Short bursts, quick relocations, coordinated strikes. German officers were stunned not by the enemy's firepower, but by its rhythm. The Americans were moving faster than they thought possible, attacking from unexpected angles, climbing terrain they believed impassable. In that moment, the myth of mechanical superiority began to erode, replaced by something new, a contest not of steel thickness, but of adaptability, nerve, and will. To the men inside those Shermans, the battle wasn't about ideology or engineering. It was survival, measured in seconds, smoke, and the feel of trembling metal under their boots. Inside the cramped steel hull, the air was thick with oil fumes and tension. The gunner's eye stayed fixed on his sight. The loader's hands blistered from the rhythm of shells. Every sound outside, the distant crack of a German 75mm, the grind of treads in mud, carried meaning. They knew the Panthers outgunned them, but they also knew the terrain better. American crews had spent weeks learning the folds of Lorraine, the sunken roads, the hedgerows, the high ridges that turned distance into defense. They moved like water, slipping through channels of fog, striking quickly, and vanishing before the heavier German tanks could traverse their turrets. Tactically, this was the quiet revolution of American armor. German commanders still thought in terms of static duels, long-range precision, perfect visibility, ideal ground. But the U.S. tank doctrine was built around maneuver warfare, combined arms, and trust. A Sherman could call artillery within minutes, request fighter-bomber support, or flank through ground the enemy dismissed as impassable. Radios, one in every vehicle, turned every platoon into a coordinated organism. Technology played its subtle role too. By late 1944, many Shermans in the 4th Armored Division carried the newer 76mm gun, finally capable of piercing Panther armor at medium range. Their engines, while less powerful, were more reliable. Their tracks could take punishment and keep moving. And though their armor was thinner, it was easier to repair, easier to replace, and, most importantly, built in numbers that Germany could no longer match. When the fog rolled thick across the Lorraine fields, these differences became decisive. German optical sights designed for long-range duels were almost useless in the mist. The Shermans closed in, firing point-blank from ridge lines and hull-down positions. By the time a Panther's gun could swing toward them, it was often already burning. To the German officers watching through the haze, the moment was disorienting. The enemy's tanks, slower, weaker, derided as inferior, were not only surviving, but advancing. Each roar of an American engine was a reminder that the war's outcome would not be decided by the strongest machine, but by the nation that could adapt the fastest. From the German side, the battlefield was a fogged mirror, distorted, confusing, and humiliating. Many of the Panther crews were fresh recruits, rushed to the front after barely a few weeks of training. Their officers carried the prestige of armored command, but not the conditions to use it. Maps were outdated, visibility almost non-existent, and radio contact unreliable. Orders came too late or not at all. In the chaos, units became isolated, firing blindly into the mist at shapes that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. What the German officers could not yet see was that they were fighting a different kind of enemy, one that no longer sought to match them tank for tank, but to overwhelm them with tempo. The American army had learned from defeat in North Africa and hard-won experience in Normandy. Initiative, not perfection, won battles. Each Sherman was a cog in a far larger design, one of logistics, coordination, and relentless motion. Psychologically, the contrast was profound. German doctrine still clung to the ideal of the decisive strike, the single overwhelming victory born from superior craftsmanship and discipline. The American crews, by contrast, operated under a philosophy of collective strength. If one tank fell, another would take its place. They were not symbols of mechanical genius. They were expressions of industrial will, and that will could climb any hill, cross any river, and replace any loss. Leadership became the quiet fulcrum of this struggle. Colonel Bruce C. Clark, commanding the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, turned coordination into art. He placed his Shermans where air power, artillery, and infantry could all support one another. German commanders, still working under rigid hierarchies, found themselves paralyzed by a fog they could not penetrate, both literal and strategic. By the end of the second day, a pattern had emerged. The Americans were no longer reacting to the German advance. They were dictating it. Panthers, forced to attack uphill or through blind terrain, became targets rather than predators. For every Sherman lost, several Panthers were left smoldering in the fields below. To those German officers who survived, it was a disorienting sight. The supposed underdog climbing higher, faster and stronger, not through brilliance of design, but through the power of adaptability. The hill they thought impassable had become the stage of their undoing. By the third morning, September 24th, the fog began to thin. A pale sun pushed through the gray, revealing the wreckage of the previous days. Blackened hulls of Panthers still smoldering beside broken hedges, fields torn by shell fire, and American mechanics already at work, repairing what could still move. Down in the valley, a new German push gathered strength. More than 40 Panthers and supporting vehicles rolled forward toward Hill 318, a commanding slope that overlooked Aricourt itself. From there they could rain destruction on the American positions. The hill was steep, freshly soaked by rain, its surface turned to thick clay. German officers were certain no tank could climb it from the western side. At 0930 hours, the first Panther opened fire. Shells slammed into the ridge, dirt and shrapnel raining over the American lines. The Shermans answered, shorter guns barking, faster reloads, coordinated like an orchestra of urgency. Then came the unexpected order from Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. "Take the hill." Engines roared to life. One after another, the Shermans surged forward, treads slipping, spinning, and finally gripping into the mud. Smoke poured from exhausts as they clawed upward through the incline, refusing to stop. German gunners watched in disbelief as the olive-drab tanks, lighter, slower, presumed inferior, began to rise above the ridgeline, one after another. At first, the Panthers fired downward. Easy targets, they thought. But the Shermans didn't stall. They crested the slope, firing on the move, using every inch of cover, every second of surprise. German shells whistled overhead, missing their marks as American gunners found theirs. The first Panther erupted in flame, then another. The formation faltered. From below, German officers shouted for counterfire. But radio confusion and shifting fog broke their cohesion. Within minutes, the assault that had promised to retake Aricourt had become a rout. Panthers burned on the very hill they were meant to command. As the smoke settled, only the sound of engines remained. The steady pulse of the Shermans still climbing, still pushing forward, symbol of a nation's unbreakable rhythm. By midday, the battle had turned into chaos. Smoke curling across the fields, tracer fires slashing through the mist, the thunder of engines echoing off the hills. The American advance had not only broken the German formation, it had unbalanced an entire belief system. The Panther, once the symbol of armored dominance, now stood burning against the horizon. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' tanks crested Hill 318 and fanned out across the ridge line, their silhouettes dark against the pale sky. From that height, the Shermans looked down upon the valley that had once belonged to the enemy. Below them, the remnants of the 111th Panzer Brigade scattered, abandoning vehicles or retreating under covering smoke. The field that was supposed to witness a German resurgence had become a graveyard of steel. Reports from surviving German officers later recorded disbelief. They spoke of the enemy's uncanny speed and of tanks that appeared where no vehicle should. The terrain, they wrote, had betrayed them. But in truth, it had simply favored the army that understood movement, not monumentality. The sound of the Sherman's radial engine became the soundtrack of victory that day. A deep, rhythmic roar cutting through the valley. It symbolized something far greater than horsepower. It was the hum of an entire economy in motion, of a nation that could outbuild, outrepair, and outlast its enemies. As dusk fell, the surviving Panthers withdrew east toward Chateau Salin, leaving behind more than half their number. The air stank of oil, cordite, and scorched paint. American crews climbed from their tanks, faces blackened with soot, eyes hollow with exhaustion. They had seen what few expected to see. The supposed masters of armored warfare forced to flee. And as the last shots faded into the twilight, the hill stood silent again. The same hill the Germans had thought impregnable now bore the scars of their undoing. The Americans had not just won a position. They had broken a legend, proving that courage, coordination, and persistence could climb higher than any design of arrogance. The Panther line was gone. The road to Germany lay open. When the smoke finally cleared over Lorraine, the numbers told their own story. In just 10 days of fighting, from September 18 to 29, 1944, the U.S. 4th Armored Division destroyed or disabled more than 80 German tanks, most of them Panthers. The Americans lost fewer than 30 Shermans in return. It was not supposed to be possible. German headquarters at Armee Gruppe G was stunned. The Panther had been promoted as the pinnacle of armored warfare, the weapon that would restore German dominance on the Western Front. Yet here, in the muddy fields of Aracourt, it had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and outpaced. Commanders filed reports blaming the fog, the inexperience of their crews, or the lack of reconnaissance. But beneath those excuses lay a truth that could no longer be ignored. The Wehrmacht's mastery of mobile warfare was slipping away. For the Americans, Aracourt became a quiet triumph. No victory parade, no grand headlines, just a growing confidence that their system worked. The combination of mass production, logistics, and flexible leadership had defeated an enemy still chasing perfection. Colonel Bruce Clark later wrote that, "The real weapon was not the tank itself, but the teamwork that made it move." Across the front, Allied strategists studied the battle carefully. It showed that modern warfare belonged not to the strongest individual weapon, but to the network that sustained it. The radio, the supply truck, the mechanic's wrench, each was as vital as the gun itself. The lesson was clear. The future of war would belong to those who could move, communicate, and adapt faster than their enemy. In the weeks that followed, reports of the Aracourt battle circulated quietly through both armies. For the Germans, it was a sobering study in decline. Panther brigades that were supposed to spearhead the defense of the Reich had been decimated before reaching the Moselle. Their supply columns ran dry, their training rushed, their leadership fractured. What had once been the model of disciplined, technologically superior warfare was now surviving on improvisation and dwindling reserves. Even as the Reich prepared for its next great gamble, the Ardennes offensive, its confidence had been shaken. The Panther, once a symbol of pride, had become a reminder of what engineering without endurance could yield. For the Americans, the lessons of Lorraine rippled upward into strategy rooms and doctrine papers. The Sherman's victory was not one of raw power, but of balance, between firepower, mobility, and reliability. The men who fought there knew its limitations better than anyone, yet they had turned those limits into strengths. By late 1944, U.S. tank design philosophy had matured into something far more profound than numbers. A belief that adaptability, not invincibility, was the key to survival. General Patton himself would later remark that the battle proved the German tank is superior in theory, inferior in war. His armored divisions carried that lesson across the Rhine the following spring. On the fields around Aracourt, the wrecks of burned Panthers were left where they fell, charred monuments to a vanished certainty. Among them stood the muddy Shermans, their engines cooling in the evening air. They had done more than hold the line. They had redefined it. In the years that followed, the wreckage at Aracourt was slowly reclaimed by the earth. Grass grew through twisted metal, and the silence of rural France returned. Yet beneath the soil lay the echoes of something larger than battle, a quiet argument between two visions of power. Germany had built its tanks like monuments, precise, elegant, and rare. Each Panther was an expression of mechanical genius, designed to dominate through fear and perfection. But perfection has limits. It cannot bend. It cannot change. It cannot multiply fast enough to meet reality. America's Shermans, by contrast, were never perfect. They were practical, built by farmers, factory workers, and engineers who understood that victory depended on movement, not magnificence. Each engine's hum was a promise that democracy could outproduce dictatorship, not only in factories, but in spirit. The roar that rolled up the hills of Lorraine that September morning was more than machinery. It was the sound of a free nation proving that strength could be collective, not singular, adaptive, not absolute. To the German officers who watched in disbelief as the Shermans climbed that hill, the shock was not just tactical, it was ideological. They were witnessing the collapse of a belief that precision alone could command destiny. Aracourt became a small name in a vast war, overshadowed by greater battles, forgotten in the shadow of victory. Yet its meaning endures. It marked the moment when mobility defeated monumentality, when cooperation triumphed over calculation, when the hum of 1,000 engines rose above the silence of arrogance. The hill still stands, quiet beneath the French sky, but somewhere in its soil lies the rhythm of those engines, steady, persistent, unyielding. A reminder that freedom, like the Sherman, climbs not because it is perfect, but because it refuses to stop.